The wedding was already loud when Emeka Osai walked through the gate at 4:17 in the afternoon. He wore a plain white kaftan that had been pressed that morning, with an iron borrowed from the neighbor 2 doors down. The kaftan was clean. The collar was straight. The sandals were leather and old, the kind that had been resoled once and would be resoled again. He carried no gift bag, no envelope visible in his hand. He walked the way a man walks when he has learned to take up only the space he needs, quietly, without apology, without announcement. The reception was being held at the Grand Oasis Gardens in East Legon, Accra, a venue that charged 12,000 cedis per hour and required a minimum booking of 4 hours. The flowers at each table were white orchids flown in from the Netherlands. The chandeliers above the outdoor canopy had been rented from a company in Cantonments district that catered exclusively to corporate galas. Emeka found a seat at a round table near the back of the 3rd row. He did not know anyone at the table. He placed his hands in his lap and watched the proceedings with the focused stillness of a man who had traveled far to be here and intended to be present for all of it. He did not know who was watching him, but someone already was. Her name was Serwa Owusu Boateng, and she was 34 years old, and she was the bride's younger sister, and she had spent 680 cedis on the dress she was wearing, a detail she had mentioned to 3 separate people before noon. She was narrow-waisted and fast-moving, and she carried the energy of someone who had been managing other people's social presentations for so long. She had developed a nearly clinical eye for who belonged where. She noticed Emeka's kaftan from 12 meters away. She noticed the sandals. She noticed the absence of a gift bag. She made a judgment, and the judgment took less than 4 seconds, and she acted on it before the cocktail hour had finished. She walked to his table the way people walk when they are about to do something they have decided is polite rather than cruel. "Excuse me," she said, and her voice was bright and loud, and several people at the table turned to look. "I just want to make sure you're at the right table. This section is reserved for the immediate family and their guests." Emeka looked up at her. He had a broad, calm face, the kind of face that has been asked to absorb things without reacting for a long time. "I was shown this seat," he said quietly, "by the young man at the entrance. He probably made a mistake." She tilted her head slightly. The smile was still there. "What's your relationship to the couple?" "I am a friend of the family," he said. "A friend of which family?" Her eyes moved, briefly, to his kaftan. Not to his face, to his kaftan. He said the groom's name. He said it simply, the way you say something that doesn't require decoration. Serwa's smile adjusted. "I see. Well, the groom's personal guests are actually seated in the outer ring." She gestured toward a cluster of tables near the garden wall, closer to the caterer's entrance, farther from the stage. "I'll have someone walk you over." She flagged down a young man in a waiter's uniform. She said something to him that Emeka was close enough to hear, but chose, by the quality of his stillness, not to respond to. He stood. He straightened the collar of his kaftan. He picked up the small glass of water he had been given and finished it before he moved, because he was thirsty and because he had been taught not to waste. He walked to the outer ring. He sat at the new table. He placed his hands in his lap again. He watched. At the neighboring table, a woman named Auntie Efua, who sold fabric at Makola Market and had known the groom's family for 19 years, saw what had happened. She watched Emeka sit down. She pressed both hands flat against the table and said nothing for a long moment. Then she leaned toward the woman beside her and spoke very quietly, and the woman beside her went still in the way people go still when they have just understood something they wish they had understood earlier. The ceremony continued. The music played. The food came out in silver trays, jollof rice and fried plantain and chicken and wakey in small bowls with shito on the side. Emeka ate. He ate without hurry. The food was good, and he was hungry, and he ate with the focus of a man who has learned to take pleasure in what is in front of him, rather than in what is not. The groom, Kabi Mensah, 29 years old, had spent the last 4 months working 14-hour days to fund this wedding. He was from a family that was comfortable but not wealthy. His father was a retired civil servant in Kumasi. His mother sold cosmetics from a stall near Kwame Nkrumah Circle. The wedding had cost them more than they had, and some they did not yet have. And Kabi had chosen every vendor himself, and had stood at this venue 3 separate times during the planning process, and had felt each time the specific anxiety of a man who is trying to give his bride the thing she deserves while calculating exactly how many months of recovery the expense would require. The bride, Nana Ama Kufuor, was beautiful in an ivory dress with beadwork around the collar that had taken a seamstress in Kumasi 3 weeks to complete. She moved through the space the way women move when they have waited for something a long time and are trying not to run toward it. She had seen Emeka when he arrived. She had squeezed Kabi's hand and whispered something to him. And Kabi's face had done a complicated thing that she had understood, but that the guests around them had not. No one had told Kabi what Sirwa had done. Not yet. At 5:43 in the afternoon, when the speeches had begun and the second round of drinks was being distributed, a car pulled into the garden's private entrance on the east side of the venue. It was a dark green Land Rover Defender that had 280,000 kilometers on the dashboard and a crack in the left side mirror that had been there for 2 years. The car was not new. It was clean. There is a difference. The man who stepped out was 61 years old. He was tall, with the kind of height that doesn't assert itself but simply exists. He wore a dark agbada embroidered at the collar and sleeves in gold thread, and he moved through the garden entrance with the measured ease of someone who has never needed to hurry, because the rooms he enters rearrange themselves around him without being asked. His name was Solomon Osei. He was Emeka's father. He was also the man whose signature appeared on the deed of the building in which the Grand Oasis Gardens operated. He was also the man who had personally contributed 40,000 cedis to the cost of this wedding, because Kabi Mensah was the son of his closest friend from university, a man named Kwadwo Mensah, who had lent him 300 cedis in 1987, when Solomon Osei had nothing. And Solomon Osei was a man who did not forget the specific weight of kindness received in hard times. He entered the garden. He scanned the space the way people scan when they are looking for someone specific. His eyes found the outer ring of tables. They found his son. He walked toward Emeka without stopping to greet anyone, which was itself a thing that people noticed, because Solomon Osei was the kind of man that people at events like this oriented toward when he arrived, and his not stopping meant something. He placed his hand on Emeka's shoulder. He said in Twi something that made Emeka smile. The first time Emeka had smiled since he arrived. Then Solomon Osei looked at the layout of the seating. He looked at the inner ring. He looked at the outer ring. He looked at the caterer's entrance that the outer ring sat closest to. He stood very still for a moment. He did not ask Emeka what had happened. He looked at his son's face, and he understood from the quality of his son's stillness what had happened, because he had raised this boy, and he knew what his stillness looked like when it was chosen rather than natural. He walked toward the main table. He walked without hurry, with his hands clasped behind his back, the way he walked when he was thinking. Sirwa was standing near the drinks table, speaking to a cousin, her dress catching the light. She saw the tall man in the gold-threaded agbada coming toward her, and her expression adjusted automatically to the brightness she gave to people who mattered at events like this. She did not know who he was. She extended her hand. She said, "Welcome, welcome. Are you a friend of the couple?" Solomon Osai shook her hand. He said, "I am a friend of the groom's father. My name is Solomon Osai." The name landed differently in different parts of the space. The wedding planner, who was standing 4 meters away reviewing a checklist on a tablet, looked up. The venue manager, who had been near the caterer's entrance, went still. Auntie Efwa, who had not moved from her seat, pressed her hands flat against the table again and watched. Surwa heard the name and ran it through her mental index and found the match, and her smile remained on her face through the effort of muscle memory, while the understanding of what she had done assembled itself behind her eyes. "I see," she said. Her voice was smaller. "My son arrived earlier," Solomon Osai said. He was not smiling. He was not frowning. His face was entirely neutral, which was a more complete expression than either. "Emeka, he was wearing a white kaftan." "Yes," Surwa said. "Where is he seated?" She gestured toward the outer ring. Solomon Osai did not say anything for 3 seconds. He was counting something internally that was not seconds. "I see," he said. He turned away from her and walked toward the primary table, where Kabi's parents were seated with the wedding coordinator. He greeted Kwadwo Mensah with both hands, the old way, and the 2 men held each other's forearms for a moment, the way men hold each other when the history between them is long and doesn't need to be said. He sat at the primary table. He gestured to Emeka across the garden. Emeka stood, adjusted his kaftan collar, and walked toward the primary table with the same measured pace he had used when he was walked away from it 2 hours earlier. He sat beside his father. The wedding planner appeared at Surwa's elbow and said, quietly, that there were some things she needed to know. If this story is already sitting heavy with you the way I think it is, subscribe now, because what Surwa learned in the next 20 minutes, she has never forgotten. What the wedding planner told her took less than 4 minutes to say. It covered several things: the building in which this garden operated, and who held the deed, and whose annual renewal of the venue's commercial operating lease kept the Grand Oasis Gardens open every year, and the amount of the private contribution to the wedding that Kabi's family did not have the means to make themselves, and the name on the cheque. Surwa listened. She did not move. The wedding planner finished. She folded her tablet under her arm and went back to her work. Surwa stood at the drinks table for a long moment, holding a glass she had forgotten to drink from. She looked across the garden at the man in the white kaftan sitting beside the tall man in gold, and she saw now what she had not seen before, which was not the kaftan, or the sandals, or the absence of a gift bag, but the quality of how Emeka sat, with his back straight, and his hands in his lap, and his attention fully on the people around him, listening the way people listen when they were raised in houses where listening was considered a form of respect. She had looked at him once and seen what he was wearing. She had not looked at him again. At 7:22 in the evening, when dinner had finished, and the dancing had started, and the garden was loud with music from a live band playing highlife and Afrobeats in a rotation that moved older guests from nodding to dancing, Surwa crossed the garden to the table where Emeka sat. She stood in front of him. He looked up. His face was still calm, still neutral, still the face of a man who had been choosing his responses to things all afternoon. "I made a mistake earlier," she said. "I want to apologize." He looked at her for a moment. "You showed me to a different seat," he said, not as an accusation, as a fact. "Yes," she said, "because of what I was wearing." She did not answer that directly, which was itself the answer. Emeka nodded slowly. he said, "I accept your apology." He said it without warmth and without coldness, the way you say something that is true but that you are not yet done thinking about. She stood there for a moment longer, as if expecting something further, and when nothing further came, she went back across the garden. His father watched this exchange without appearing to watch it. He said nothing. He poured Emeka a glass of water from the jug at the center of the table and placed it in front of him. "Your collar needs adjusting on the left," he said. Emeka reached up and fixed it. "Good," his father said. The music played. The dancing continued. Outside in the garden, under lights strung between the acacia trees, Kabi Mensa danced with Nana Amakufor, his new wife, her ivory dress catching the warm light, and the beadwork at her collar throwing small points of brightness across the faces of everyone watching. Auntie Afua was on the dance floor. She danced with her full body, the way she had danced for 61 years, without apology, without modification, with the joy of someone who has outlasted enough nonsense to have earned the right to take up space. Nobody moved Emeka Ose from his seat again that night. What Serwa Owusu Boateng saw when she looked at Emeka was a kaftan that cost less than her shoes. What she missed was a man who had been raised by someone who built the room she was standing in. These things are not the same kind of mistake. The first is a misreading of information. The second is a failure of the imagination. The specific failure of not considering that the world you're navigating might be owned, in some important way, by the person you're deciding to dismiss. The people the world moves to the outer ring are not always the people the outer ring was built for. Some of them are sitting quietly, hands in their laps, watching everything, already knowing more than you think they know about where the power in the room actually lives. The kaftan doesn't tell you. The sandals don't tell you. The absence of a gift bag tells you nothing. The only thing that tells you is attention, sustained, patient, unhurried attention to who a person actually is before you decide who they are allowed to be. You can move a man from one table to another. You can point toward a seat near the caterer's entrance. You can make a smile that says he belongs somewhere smaller. But you cannot move what he carries with him. You cannot reassign his history, his name, or his father's handshake. Those things go where he goes. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, they are heavier than anything in the room. Emeka Ose went home that night in his father's Land Rover, the one with 280,000 kilometers on the dashboard and the crack in the left mirror. He pressed his face briefly against the cool of the window as they pulled out of East Legon. He was tired. He had been adjusting his stillness all afternoon, and that takes something out of you that sleep doesn't always give back. His father drove without speaking for the first several minutes. Then he said, without looking away from the road, "You stayed." "Yes," Emeka said. "Good," his father said. They drove the rest of the way home in the comfortable silence of men who have already said everything that needed to be said. Before you go, here is something I want you to sit with. If you were at that wedding and you watched what happened to Emeka from your seat at the next table, and you had the power to say something, and you chose not to, what would your reason have been? And would that reason have changed when his father walked in? Think about whether the reason would have changed, because the answer to that question is the answer to something more important than this story. Leave your answer in the comments. I read them. Subscribe for more stories about quiet strength, hidden power, and the people the world tries to put at the outer tables, until it finds out who they actually are. I'll see you in the next one.